When it comes to inner critic, like in schema therapy, that part of us they used to call it historically, they used to call it the inner parent, because initially we believed was that we internalized the voices of our parents, especially that negative critical voice, either through direct experience or indirect experience, through the things that we witnessed and we observed.
Hey guys, welcome to our SoulFam Podcast, where I interview space holders from all over the world. I'm your host, my name is Karolina, and I'm the manifestation mentor and connection catalyst. Today on the show, we have Ioana Rotaru, a psychotherapist. Welcome to the show, Ioana. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. So thank you for having me here. I'm excited about today.
Yes, me too. I'm super happy that you agreed to be on the podcast, because the topics that we're going to touch today are quite deep and quite intimate, I would say. So it's great that we want to talk about these vulnerable things that not many people talk about, and they're sometimes taboo. And so I would love to jump straight into one of these topics, which is shame. And I'm really curious to know your perspective on shame. Like, what even is shame? What is this emotion? Why do we feel it? Where does it come from? And also, how to deal with it in the best way that you found with yourself and your clients, to just really not be a slave of it, and to really, let's say, find alignment with this emotion within yourself.
Yeah. Oh, so I mean, where do I even begin to start? Because shame is such a broad topic, and it's something that we can spend hours and hours on end discussing. And I'm sure, like, you probably have heard, like, one of the most famous kind of researcher in this kind of therapeutic space on shame is like Brené Brown, who I absolutely love and adore. And, she's been spending years and years and years studying shame. So let's hope that we can do it some justice in this, roughly 1 hour, 45 minutes talk. But what we know about shame is that it's a universal human emotion. So we all have the capacity to experience shame, and we all do experience shame as well. And unlike other emotions, if we were to compare shame to guilt is often about, I have made a mistake, so I'm experiencing guilt because I have made a mistake. Whereas shame is, it gets me emotional when I talk about shame, but shame is more ingrained and deeper than that. Shame says it's not just that I've made a mistake, it's that I am a mistake, it's that I'm defective and that there's something wrong with me in some way. And it very much, like when you think about shame, it very much feels like a punishing emotion, which in many ways it is about punishing ourselves with the intent of correcting that. But it sounds like it is a punishing emotion, but actually I do think that shame is very much a connecting emotion. It's an emotion that we experience because we want to maintain a level of connection with the people around us, so our immediate relationships, but also like the wider groups, like families and society, and everything that's kind of around us, all the other sort of relationships that are around us that are wider beyond the intimate relationships. So yeah, what do you think of the idea that it can feel quite punishing, but actually it is quite a connecting emotion?
I totally agree with that, because the part of us that maintain the shame actually need belonging, and they want to keep us safe to belong and to not have social consequences. Because really, to me, shame is like the fear of the consequences in the social settings. So it's actually something that keeps connection. So it's kind of like a protector part of us that keeps us connected to the group, and keeps us in boxes so that we don't stand out too much, so that we are actually getting acceptance and love from people around us. And of course, it can be unhealthy, right? If we don't utilize it only as a sign, but if we actually let's say, blow on it and dwell on it and make it bigger and bigger, then it's a punishing tool. But if we just use it as a tool to check, okay, is this within the moral values of myself and my surroundings, or my family, or my friends, then it actually can be serving emotion for us rather than punishing emotion. But as you said this with this punishment, I just remembered how I had a session once with someone who had an autoimmune disease, and we went into the it was like a rheumatoid arthritis or something like that in English. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly.
Rheumatoid arthritis, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so we went into, I was like, okay, how do you feel about this? Like, focus on your ankle where this disease is. And then we came back to the trauma where this person felt so ashamed and so embarrassed. So it's kind of like almost like a flavor of self-hate where we are against ourselves. And usually autoimmune diseases are caused by our parts being against ourselves. And so it just reminded me of this situation, because sometimes we don't even realize how big this issue can be if we treat shame in this, let's say, more unhealthy, self-punishing way. It can literally cause us the disease, something like the autoimmune reaction in our body. And so, yeah, I totally agree that it could be benefiting for us, but it could be also like a punishment internally for ourselves, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that one, because, anything that we have, especially the fact that shame is a universal emotion, the implication of it is that it has a positive function. It helps us in some way. And like you're correct, spot on in saying that it is about connection. It is about, okay, am I doing something that threatens my ability to belong to a group, that threatens my ability to conform to social norms? Because if I do something like that, I experience shame, and then I can correct that, so I can do things, I can repair things in order to connect again. But if I didn't experience any shame at all, and I was behaving in a way that would lead to a lot of rejection, a lot of abandonment, a lot of kind of social exclusion, then I would end up feeling really isolated, really lonely, like an outcast, which would later on cause even bigger problems. It would be quite a traumatic experience, because we are social beings, right? So we do thrive in connection and belonging to groups. So it's that's what I find fascinating about shame, is that it feels very punishing, and it is, like, absolutely, when we experience it cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally, it is very punishing, very self-punishing. But it does have that positive function. It has that positive adaptation and the purpose to it as well. And the other thing that I find interesting about shame is just how unconscious it is compared to any other emotions. If I feel angry, anger is quite an acceptable emotion. So we all can quite identify when we're angry, like we feel that emotion, we accept it. If we feel happy, we accept it. We know what it feels like. We feel the sadness as well. But shame operates so much on the subconscious and unconscious levels that we often don't know that that's what we're experiencing. We often don't even know that we feel shame. And part of it is because anytime that if shame was related to my thought of being, that if I believed about myself that I'm defective or I'm unlovable, and I felt shame, like, of course, no one likes to feel that, right? No one likes to think that they're unlovable or that they're defective in some way. So we do try to repress, we do try to not think about that, and we do try not to experience any shame. So we kind of push it away, which is why it has this kind of unconscious, subconscious layers to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it as well. And also, even if you look at the scale of consciousness of Dr. David Hawkins, you see that shame and guilt are on the lowest level, right? So these are the emotions that are actually like the lowest vibration. So they are super heavy for us, and yet they are super hidden, as you said. So it's really about digging into all these layers of ourselves and having such a big self-awareness and mindfulness of ourselves and what's coming up. And also about, I feel, attunement to our body to see, okay, like what shows up in my body, and then linking it to the specific feeling, because otherwise we might not even, it might just slip our awareness, and then we just build up the more and more more layers of it if we're not going there deeply into it and resolving it. And so that brings me to this question, like, how do you resolve shame? How do you deal with it? And how do you approach it so that it's actually light and doesn't feel so heavy, doesn't feel like a burden or something that we just really suppress and disown and reject within ourselves?
So I think a lot of it has to do with awareness and understanding. So and kind of education. So understanding about shame, understanding what it is, what it does, kind of normalizing it that we all experience it, because it can kind of create a bit of a cycle in that we feel ashamed because we feel shame in the first place. So it's just like a vicious cycle.
That's funny.
So yeah, exactly. And obviously, if that just kind of keeps us stuck, we can't really recover, we can't really heal. So it's just even having the awareness, understanding like how it functions, what keeps it going, what are the origins of shame, which of course is very different for everybody, because we all have our own personal stories of kind of what has led us to experience the level of shame that we do. So yeah, I do think that the first step would be bringing into kind of conscious awareness, having that knowledge, having that education about shame. But the second one, and it sounds, I do cringe a little bit saying this, because I'm one of those therapists that used to really cringe at the term I'm about to use, which is self-compassion, because I'm very straightforward, straight talking, no fluff as a therapist and the way I work. And self-compassion always felt like one of those, fluffy terms, like, yeah, like a bit, like
rainbows and unicorns and self-compassion.
Yeah, exactly. So it feels like, gosh, what are we about to do? How am I even gonna start helping myself? But self-compassion is key to overcoming that feeling of shame, or that level of kind of ingrained shame that we experience. And the other one is, shame thrives on secrecy. So the more we keep our story hidden, the more we don't share it, the more we don't expose it to anybody else, the more vulnerable we'll feel, the more shame we'll feel. And again, it'll create another vicious cycle, in the sense that it will lead us to want to hide it and to avoid it even further. So the antidote to that is to learn to share our story. Again, coming to Brené Brown, but it's about owning it and about sharing our stories, because once the story is shared, there's another person that is still connecting, it's still showing empathy to us, and that level of shame on its own dissipates, it disappears.
Yeah, because then this emotion, the story is expressed and not suppressed within us. And that's how exactly I practice it when it comes to like sexual, trauma and sexual shame. With my friends, we were just like talking about all the shameful experiences from the past. And when you just like express it to your friends, and you know that it's safe, and you know that these people are still going to give you love and acceptance and belonging, it just feels so freeing to be able to say it out loud and to make it okay for this emotion to be there. And then to realize that every single person on this planet has some kind of experience like that. So then if we can make it normal, if we can just accept it as it is and allow ourselves to feel this, rather than being like, oh no, there's something wrong with me because I feel shame. And as you said, it's the cycle of like layers upon layers of shame, feeling ashamed about feeling ashamed about feeling ashamed, and so on. Then we can just like really break ourselves free. And also I feel like really allowing ourselves to be fully in it, and like relaxing into it, really finding comfort in this discomfort. Like, that's what I like to say to my clients, like, just find the comfort in this uncomfortable sensation and breathe into it. Or maybe even do some inner child work, where go back to the first time that you felt this way and really be in this memory, and like allow yourself to feel all this, so that everything is like expressed out of your body, rather than being stored and suppressed, and like really not letting the energy flow and the freedom to be there. So I'm curious to know, do you also work with like trauma and inner child when it comes to shame?
Yeah, so in terms of my training, so my basic training is in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But a few years ago, I came across it's slightly different type of therapy. I mean, it is a different type of therapy, but it's still under the CBT umbrella, so to speak, which is called schema therapy, which is very similar schema therapy is very similar to other therapies, such as internal family systems or parts work. So the whole idea that we do have an inner child and we do have different parts of us that respond, that are kind of like coping strategies to protect that inner child. So yeah, schema therapy does touch upon that. So yeah, I do, in my work, I do touch upon understanding the inner child and working with that as well.
Amazing. Yeah, I do parts work as well. And it's one of my favorite practices ever because it's just bringing the subconscious mind to the conscious mind. And then it's like, okay, now I know what's up. Now I know how to deal with it because it's everything is so clear. So that's amazing. I'm curious to also know what's your perspective on the difference between being shamed and feeling shame so that it's like clear that these are two different things.
I suppose I've never kind of reflected on this before, but thinking out loud with you and kind of thinking it with you, I think being shamed is more about someone else's attempt at instilling that emotion into us, right? Someone's attempt to criticize us, humiliate us, put us down, make us feel small. But I guess feeling shamed, it really depends, because we do have a choice. If someone's trying to shame us, we do have the choice on how we respond. We do have the choice on whether we want to believe those words. And then, of course, if we believe those words, it would lead to certain emotions and certain behavioral responses. But we also have, when we have a strong sense of self, when we have a really good relationship with ourselves as well, when we have worked quite a lot with our inner child, somebody's attempt at shaming us doesn't have to be shaming for us, because we don't necessarily have to believe it. We don't necessarily have to listen to that voice and dwell on it and take it as the reality or as the truth. So I guess on the spot, answering that question, I think that's how I would perceive the differences, but I don't know if you have a different opinion.
Oh yeah, for me it's the same. Like shaming someone, it's almost like manipulation. It's almost like putting someone down and just like trying to create this feeling inside of them. But the truth is, if there is no part of you that agrees with what this person is saying, then it can't really touch you, because if you know who you are and you're centered within yourself and you have high self-esteem and you know who you are and it doesn't really affect you what anyone is saying, then no one can really shame you. But if it touches you, that means that there is some resistance that needs to be looked at, and maybe subconscious beliefs or something that is resonating with what this person is saying, because otherwise it wouldn't even move us. But yeah, thanks a lot for
100%.
answering this on the spot.
Thank you.
Really, really cool. And also, I'm curious to explore this topic of shame and intimacy, and how is intimacy linked to shame, because I feel like there is a lot of correlation between feeling this and then being able to build the real, true, deep intimacy with someone else.
Yeah, 100%. There is a very strong correlation. And going back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier in terms of our own stories, the shame doesn't just come on its own as an emotion that we feel emotionally or in our body. Shame also comes with a really vicious, really cruel, critical voice. So it's that voice that just makes us feel small, that just doesn't give us a break. It's so vicious. And it's that voice that actually leads us to creating barriers in our relationships with people, with our partners, with our friends, any sort of relationship. And it's what leads to having barriers in intimacy as well. Because what I was thinking, like even sessions that I've had this week with my clients, often my clients come to me and they're like, oh, Ioana, there's something that I really want to share with you. I've been, holding it back, or there's something that's really been on my mind. And that instantly tells me that there's something that they have felt really ashamed about, really ashamed to share it. And when they do share it with me, it feels like the most minuscule thing. Like, they see themselves as such a bad, such a defective, such a, horrible person. But actually, who they are doesn't match with that vicious voice that they have in their mind. So I find that so interesting, which is why I said that shame is so personal to us, because it's just that narrative that we have in our mind or have in our brain about what's going on, who we are, how we show up in the world, how other people perceive us. And it's that vicious voice that leads us to a lot of disconnection. It leads us to disconnect with people, unfortunately.
Yeah, and also like that brings me to this topic of parts work again, because I feel like this inner critic is usually just internalized parent or caregiver within us, that when we are children and our mother is like screaming at us, like, you always leave mess around. I mean, I'm just making it up right now on the spot,
Yeah.
but like, oh my God, like shaming us for not cleaning our room. Then what we do is we copy paste our mom and we internalize the figure inside of us as a separate personality of our mom inside of us that will shame us before we even get to, you know, experience another disapproval or lack of love from our mother. So then this inner critic comes internalized and tells us, oh, clean the room right now, because otherwise you're going to be shamed for it again. And it's shaming us even before it's external. We're shaming ourselves internally, and that's how these inner critic parts of us are formed. And so when we have awareness of it, that these are only like parts of us, it's not the truth of us, it's not the wholeness of us, but these are only the parts that are talking when we criticize ourselves and when we feel shame. Then it's easier to, through this lens, to work with it and to not get so identified with the feeling. And I feel like when we can disidentify with the feeling, it's way easier to move through it, it's way easier to relax into it, it's way easier to accept it as it is and not reject it, and just do something about this energy that is inside of us, rather than like just resisting us, like having a classic mechanism, right? Because everyone has some inner critic inside. It's not like there's not one person on this in this world that doesn't have inner critic in some way.
Absolutely.
Right? So we need to just be okay with it and just like navigate it, and not be like, okay, I'm not supposed to have an inner critic. It's like, okay, understand why this inner critic is there, because maybe, just maybe, it's actually nice when you clean your room.
Yeah.
And it's actually nice if you maintain cleanliness, but just without this whole emotional charge behind it that gets you so down or so you know, not feeling that good. But maintaining this just framework and like seeing what's actually aligned and what's not aligned could be actually beneficial for us. And this inner critic is always beneficial for us. We just need to know how to talk to it and how to meet its needs so that it's like working for us and not against us. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%, absolutely. And you know, when it comes to inner critic, like in schema therapy, that part of us they used to call it, historically, they used to call it the inner parent, because you know, initially we believed was that we internalized the voices of our parents, especially the negative critical voice, either through direct experience or indirect experience, through the things that we witnessed and we observed, and we believe that that became our own inner critical voice. But I think they moved away from the term of inner parent, and now they're going towards inner critic, in the fact that we're acknowledging that it's not just our parents that have influenced that. It can be the wider group that we have been exposed to growing up, such as siblings. You know, we do know about sibling rivalry. We know that there can be jealousy between siblings and fights and stuff like that, but also other family members, also our peer group at school, our teachers, the people that we were exposed to, you know, like religion, culture, they also play a role in contributing to the inner critic. And absolutely, that we don't have to let that voice be so intense in terms of how we feel emotionally, but we also don't have to listen to everything that he says, in the sense of you know, they're just thoughts. They don't have to be the reality. We can challenge them. We can stand up to those thoughts. We can teach ourselves to think and view the world from different perspectives. And we also can learn to just accept that our voice is going to be there and don't have to do anything about it. We can mindfully learn to change, to shift our attention from that voice to doing whatever we were doing, to going about our business and carrying on without being affected by the inner critic. But just to reinforce the point, absolutely, we all have an inner critic to some degree, because we have been exposed to other humans growing up that, you know, not everyone that we're exposed to will be nice, regardless of where you're coming from, regardless of your background and kind of history. And also, again, like you rightly pointed, having that inner critic doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative. It can also be very motivating, but we need to know how to fine tune the voice so we don't let it be vicious, so we don't let it be very critical. We can use it to our advantage. Like you said, it can actually be nice to clean your room. So, but it's just about knowing when and how to do it as well.
Yeah, and also having this awareness that if we suppress this part of us, it will come in unhealthy ways, right? And it will just stand out in us and be expressed in unhealthy ways. Whereas when we more tame it, quote unquote, when we are aware of it and we listen to it and we can express it in healthy ways, then it has no reason to come and just screw us up with some unhealthy behaviors and patterns, because then we are consciously giving it space and time to be expressed when it's actually needed, rather than in random places and times when it's actually not needed. But we need to just take it on board and integrate it so we become whole and we don't have any fragments of us that we are not aware of. And so, yeah, that's beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I would love to come back for a moment to intimacy as well, like linked to shame and intimacy, and like also just bring the definition of intimacy from your perspective and from my perspective. We will see if we agree, because I feel like this link is like massive when it comes to shame and being seen in this shame and intimacy. So what's your definition of intimacy? Let's start with that.
I guess it depends on what sort of relationships are we talking about. So if it's like in romantic relationships, of course, many people associate it with kind of physical intimacy, where there's kind of connection for touch, through, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual intimacy, but physical, for touching, kissing, that sort of stuff. But I don't think intimacy is just physical. I think intimacy is also very much psychological and emotional. And I don't know if you've ever read the work of Dr. Sue Johnson. She's written a book. It's really, really good. I recommend it to anyone listening. It's called Hold Me Tight. Sue Johnson, she is the creator of this couples therapy called EFT, emotionally focused therapy, I suppose. I think that's what it stands for, which is very much attachment based, looking at how our attachment styles show up in our relationships, how it leads to conflict and things like that. And one of the concepts that she does talk about is the concept of emotional and psychological safety. And I very much associate that with intimacy. The idea of, can I really try? Can I allow myself to be myself with my partner? Can I trust that they will be there for me? Can I trust that I can show all parts of myself and they will still love me anyway? I've got goosebumps saying this. I don't know, there's something happening inside me, but for me, this is really touching. And when I think of intimacy, that's what I think about, that level of emotional safety, that level of, do I have the certainty that I can be myself and you can still hold me?
That's beautiful. And that's exactly how I see it, because my mentor says intimacy, like into me see. It's like, how seen can you be in front of this person? Like, can you show all parts of you? Can you show the essence of who you are? And that's why it's so deeply linked to shame, right? Because shame is usually when we want to hide ourselves. We want to hide what's wrong about ourselves that we perceive as wrong. But if we can release the shame and just be who we are, raw as we are, and it's in every context, as we said, sexually, right? It's in this context as well. Can I be raw with the person that I'm sexually intimate with? Or am I ashamed of how I am or how I look, or whether I'm, I have bigger or smaller boobs, or whether like whatever, I'm shaved or not, or like whatever. It could be so many things that we could feel ashamed of. But the real intimacy, when we can be like, okay, see me as I am, and just be present in connection, whether it's sexual or not. It could be just emotional connection or just touch, like hugs or whatever. But can we be fully ourselves and feel seen and feel trusting and feel like we can express ourselves authentically with this person? So yeah, I loved what you said, and I totally agree. It's amazing.
Thank you. But I think one of the things that we haven't touched upon, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about that, is and sorry, I'm taking over your podcast.
Please.
But I think it's quite important, it's how we actually cope with shame, because we don't all cope with it in the same way. So I usually think about it in terms of, like the fight or flight response. So I usually think about it in that way. So some of us, when we experience shame, we want to fight it. We want to make the feeling go away. So we fight it either with things like perfectionism. So, if only I can show, if I can do everything right, if I can achieve, if I can be this, 100% right person, then I won't feel any shame. I'll feel good enough about myself. Or some people fight it with grandiosity, and this is what is very common in narcissism. Narcissism feels like it's a disease of too much self-esteem, but actually narcissism is a disease of too much shame. And one of the ways we cope with that is, if I can only show people how great I am, how, boast about my achievements and boast about what a wonderful person I am, then I can hide my shame. Then I can fight it by not showing it to the world in the first place. So in terms of the fight response, that's perfectionism and grandiosity are the two things that I can think of right now. I suppose the other one is sometimes some of our parts are in terms of anger. So if I show my angry face, if I am a little bit like a bully, I can push people away so they can't see the shame that I feel about myself. So again, I guess that's the essence of fighting, right? The anger. Whereas in terms of the flight response, some people, the way they deal with that level of shame is trying to escape it, trying to run away from it. So that can be through numbing our emotions. So that usually means using something else, such as drugs, such as alcohol, such as porn, such as shopping, such as mindless scrolling on social media. Anything that we can do to numb our emotions, to distract, to kind of give us a bit of an escape. It's very much linked to the flight response where we're escaping that feeling of shame. And I guess the last one, so fight, flight, and freeze. So in terms of like the freeze response, it's I suppose it's about surrendering to it and kind of just accepting it. And there are people, and I'm sure that you've met, and I'm sure I meet them in my clinical room all the time, and I'm sure that you meet it as well in the work that you do. People that just accept and just see themselves as less than, as defective, as unworthy in some way, and just strongly believing that. And in a way, it's not embracing shame in a positive way, it's just like surrendering to it. So
yeah, it's kind of like taking it as an identity, almost like as a part of themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. And I also feel like with some people, it's overgiving and self-sacrifice as well to avoid being shamed and to avoid feeling guilty. Like I see this as a pattern, like according to Enneagram as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Enneagram typology. It's a personality of a typology of personality that I like the most. And there's giver, achiever, and artist. And all these three personalities, their core emotion that they feel is shame. And it's very much about, like overgiving and sacrificing to cover it up, or like feeling not enough and achieving so much to feel enough, and also to be like super individualist, like very much disconnected from everyone, and like I'm so unique, I'm just like, screw all these people, like if they're gonna shame me or whatever, I'm just gonna avoid and be on my own and just close myself in my own bubble and not even like look there, so that I don't even expose myself to people so that they don't shame me. And so these are all these things that you were already talking about, and it's great that you're talking about the coping mechanism, because I feel like sometimes people are just not aware that they are doing something to cover something up, right? So to all of you who listen, like ask yourself, like if you're, for example, scrolling through social media, like is it that you're actually with awareness choosing to do this, or is it that you're avoiding shame or any other feeling in this moment? Because it's like really, really important to just be conscious of yourself and know where your patterns are coming from, and also what's your intention behind what you're doing, because the intention behind what you're doing is going to shape the whole energy, like that is going to direct the energy in this way. And so if you do something with the intention of avoiding shame, there's like, for example, if you exercise to avoid shame of how big you are, let's say, or overweight or whatever, then if you're exercise with the feeling of like, oh, I need to avoid the shame, then your results are going to be way different than if you exercise because you're like, okay, I love myself and love my body and I really want to feel better with myself, and this is why you do it. So I just want to mention that because I feel like intention is very important behind everything.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what I was saying initially about shame, with the fact that because it's so unconscious, we often don't realize the responses that we have. Like, just try and talk to a narcissist, and some of us, that's truly narcissist, not the way it's being used on social media nowadays. And just try and get them to admit that they even feel shame in the first place. That would be a really, really hard task, because it's just so ingrained, and there's so many layers, so many masks, so many protective things that cover the shame, that we just don't even realize that the way we are behaving, the way we're responding to situations in the first place is because we experience shame.
Yeah. And so on this topic, I would love you to share what's your perspective on communication when it comes to shame and other feelings as well, because I feel like it's so hard for people to express it. It's like, I'm ashamed of this. It's like so hard to even bring it up to the other person. But as we spoke about before, it's like so important to actually express it out loud and say it vulnerably, so that it doesn't have control over you, but you actually have control over your shame. So how do you vulnerably communicate your feelings?
I think he actually has to start with the relationship that you have with yourself before you can focus on the relationship you have with others. That doesn't mean that I'm not implying that, you have to be single before you get into a relationship. That's not the implication at all. But it's the stronger the relationship you have with yourself, the stronger your other relationships will be as well. Because when you have a good relationship with yourself, you can mindfully understand what it is that you're thinking, what it is that you're feeling, and you can mindfully then communicate that. So instead of, again, in relationships, acceptable emotion is anger. Like having a go at my partner for not doing the dishes, having a go at my partner for not listening to me, or whatever it is. It feels really acceptable to do that. Like we can't even make jokes about it, and we tolerate it and we accept it. But often when we take a step back, we know that there's actually, the argument about the dishes is never really an argument about dishes. There's layers to it. There's more to it in that argument, and it is often related to our sense of vulnerability and our sense of shame as well. So like, I might be angry at my partner for not doing the dishes, but what I'm really thinking is, gosh, they're not considering me, so therefore does that mean that I can't really rely on them? Does that mean that they're not truly there for me? So when we go into that thought pattern, then those emotions of shame, of vulnerability actually come up. But if we don't have any awareness, we're gonna think that, oh well, I'm angry at them because they never did the dishes. But it's not about that. It's because it's touching something deeper within us, not just dishes.
Exactly. It's never about the dishes, really, when you look at it. But yeah, I love what you said about relationship with yourself and then bringing it to the other person, because if you can admit to something in front of yourself, and some people even cannot do that, then it's way easier to also bring it up with the person that you're with. And I feel like if you also have a right pre-frame, something like, hey, if you talk to your partner, like, hey, darling, I really need to share something vulnerably with you. Are you in the space to listen to me and just be present and just receive what I'm saying without judging me, without giving me advice, without reacting in any way, apart from just holding space for what I have to share, so that I can feel safe to express whatever I want. And then if we can take responsibility for the pre-frame and for the framework or the intention of how we want to express and communicate our feelings, then it's way easier for this other person to be like, yes, I'm in the space, or no, I'm not in the space. And then we ourselves can create the safety in our relationships and our communication to to just put something like a container on this conversation, so that we can feel good about expressing it. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to add to it.
Right, that yeah, that's a good addition, and I do agree with you on everything that you just said.
Amazing. And so I have one last little question to you. I would love you to share a little bit about your services and what you are offering and where to find you when it comes to your content. Where are you the most active? If someone would love to follow you more and dive deeper with you, I would love you to share it with us.
So like I briefly mentioned, I'm a CBT therapist by training, but in reality, in the work that I do, I love parts therapy. So I do incorporate that, especially from schema therapy. I also love compassion-focused therapy and ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which I incorporate in my individual work. But I'm also trained as a couples therapist. And I do follow the principles of Sue Johnson, which is EFT, emotionally focused therapy, just because I love attachment theory. So in terms of what I'm interested in, I love working with trauma, especially childhood and kind of developmental trauma, where there are attachment wounds, especially emotional neglect. That's kind of my go-to. That's quite kind of what I'm interested in, and I'm especially interested in helping clients understand how their past is impacting their relationships in the here and now, and also their careers, and helping them using kind of tips, techniques, and tools from CBT, CFT, ACT, helping them to have better relationships, first with themselves, then with others, as well as kind of having fulfilling and meaningful careers. I'm in London. I train in London. I work in London. I am available both face-to-face in London, but I also do therapy online. So I actually have clients from all over the world, not just in the UK, which is beautiful. I think that's one of the, if I dare say this, one of the positives of the pandemic, because it kind of forced, like a field like therapy. Of course, people were used to work online before as well, but the pandemic has kind of forced us to embrace working online more and more. And I think that the advantage of that was that it gave me the chance to meet people from all over the world and work with them as well, which is great.
That's amazing. And where do you have the most of your content so that people could follow you?
So I'm most active on Instagram, and my ad is Ioana.Rotaru.therapy. I'm now on Threads as well. Like Threads opened yesterday. I don't know if you joined it already. No?
Not yet.
Oh, it's it might be because it's not available in the EU yet, because you're in Poland, right?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. And I guess this is one of the advantages of Brexit, because we're not part of the EU anymore in the UK. So they allowed us to have Threads. So hopefully, I mean, Threads is just like Twitter for Instagram. So it's like a new app that they developed. But I'm on it as well, which is pretty fun because it allows me to like freely write things. So yeah, but I do tend to share the content on Instagram as well. So if you follow me on Instagram, you're not gonna miss out if you're not on Threads.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ioana. I'm really, really grateful for this conversation and, bringing the topic of taboo almost to the light now. And so thank you so much for all the advice that you have given and your beautiful energy. And I'm sure that all the listeners loved it as well. So massive gratitude to you.
Thank you as well. Thank you for inviting me. And it was a privilege, and I do hope that anyone listening to this had something to take away from it and kind of inspire them to reconnect to themselves.